So my guest this morning is not a stranger to the Reading Circle, not a stranger at all, as he has actually been on the show at least. This is I think, if I'm not recalling, I know it's at least his second, it might be his third. And he's coming on because he's just released another new book. And whenever I promoted the show with him being a Renaissance man. And the interesting thing about him, he's so modest that no matter where I looked, I could not find a bio. I found a description of each book that he's written, but I could not find a bio of him. So I'm going to allow him to introduce himself, but we're going to talk about who he is over the next hour or so. I have known this gentleman since I was in high school. As a matter of fact, in many instances, as I walked around the hallway, people would actually get us confused because we look somewhat similar in terms of our height, and both of us wore glasses and the way we wore our hair and all that good stuff. Many times I would be walking down the hall and people would say, "Skip," and I'd turn around and I'm like, "No, I'm not Skip." Or either they would, "Mr. Van Rensselaer." "No, I'm not Mr. Van Rensselaer." And so he is my guest this morning. Skip, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Can you hear me?
I hear you fine. You're coming through loud and clear now. Great. So he is my guest this morning, and he, like I said, he over the course of the years, and like I said, I've known him since I was like 15, might even be earlier than that, 14, 15, 16 years old at the infamous Eastside High School. That's where we met, and every year, during Easter break, right before Easter break, that Thursday night or so before Good Friday, somewhere around there, we would have this talent show. It was called the Black and Gold Review. And my guest this morning was always like the MC of that show. What I did not know at the time was why that was called the Black and Gold Review, because it was sponsored by the fraternity that we are now both in. He was in it already, and I became in there later on. But it was the Black and Gold Review that symbolized our colors. Black and gold. But we would have a wonderful time. Then, because I'm introducing him in a weird way that I normally don't, because I usually read a bio, but I'm introducing him in a different way. Then at our football games, we had this humongous football game that would be done every year on Thanksgiving between the two city high schools, Kennedy High School and Eastside High School. And the caller for the game, particularly during the halftime show for the bands, was this gentleman that we have this morning. And he would put on one heck of a performance calling the performance of the band. He's also been the manager and the producers of the group Riff, as well as he has written now, I think this is his second or his third book. I know it's at least his second because the first one was about Riff. But ladies and gentlemen, enough about that. My guest this morning is none other than Dale Skip Van Rensselaer. Skip, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. How you doing? That was a nice intro, man. I was listening to you talk about back in Eastside when we looked alike, and we both had hair.
That's right. A long time ago. Yeah, because we're both bald now. We still get confused.
Yeah, still get confused.
Yeah, we had hair then, and we're both bald now. But in any event, as I was saying in the intro, Skip, he was always a musician, as well as, he did a lot of the master of ceremonies. Then he ultimately managed the group whenever the movie came out, Lean on Me, the boys that was in that movie. Skip ultimately wound up managing them, producing them, and then his son, Darnell, actually went on to solo, If Ever I Fall in Love Again. I'm sure that we're a friend. If any of you know that song, that's Darnell, that's Skip's son, and now he has a daughter who's actually touring the country on Broadway, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So I'll tell you what, Skip, let's go all the way, because first off, let me put this in the backdrop as well. Skip's family, the Van Rensselaer family, is a historic family in the city of Paterson, New Jersey. So let's go all the way back. Now let's talk a little bit about that, and then work our way through to everything that you do and have done.
There's a historical landmark in Paterson. The Underground Railroad site was on Broadway near Memorial Boulevard, and used to be called the Huntoon's Corner. Abolitionist by the name of Josiah Huntoon and his good friend, engineer William Van Rensselaer, assisted bringing slaves, not bringing them to freedom, but once they came to freedom, having them live there in their home at Huntoon's Corner. I don't know the exact address. So I'm a direct descendant of William Van Rensalier. He's my great-great-great-grandfather. So that's the connection there. But I did mention, we'll talk about it later, I did mention that briefly in the book, because I have my own ideas about descendants of that particular area, Huntoon's Corner. But that's how that came about. I'm a direct descendant of William Van Rensalier.
And that was a part of the Underground Railroad that went through Paterson, New Jersey.
It actually, I found out later on through the historian Jimmy Richardson, who actually does like 3 or 4 pages at the end of my book on history of Paterson. But he enlightened me that the slaves would come up near Garrett Mountain, and they would make the trek from Garrett Mountain. They would flash a lantern from Huntoon's Corner up to Garrett Mountain, letting them know it was safe for them to come down there. And they would come down, I think, a passageway or a street called Stony Road. And ironically enough, I was told they were assisted, the slaves were assisted at the Huntoon's Corner by members of the Goblin Street Amy Zion Church, which is now the first Amy Zion Church, where I'm a member. And they would come down to Huntoon's Corner.
So he's historic. Now, your mom was an administrator or worked in the education system as well.
She worked for 44 years before she retired in 92. Various elementary schools. Number 6, I think she stayed at the most. Eventually was transferred to the high school. You talked about Kennedy earlier, but Kennedy, for those who are our age, used to be Central High School. So she taught English at Central High School and stayed there when they changed over to Kennedy. And when she retired, she was an administrator, dean of girls.
Now, okay, Dean of Girls, because that's where I was going to do. I was thinking there was like certain names when I was in high school because see, at that time, and I don't even know if they have that position now, but we had at Eastside, it was a Dean of Boys and a Dean of Girls. For the boys, it was Mr. Barnes. It was Paul Barnes. And for the girls, it was Beulah Philpotts. And folks knew that you did not play with Mr. Barnes and Miss Philpotts. And on the Kennedy side, it was Skip's mom, Miss Van Rensselaer. Those names, folks to this day will say, oh, no, you did not play with them. Miss Van Rensselaer did not play. Miss Philpotts did not play. Mr. Barnes did not play. They were like legendary in terms of you knew you were not going to get over on them.
Yeah, I think the Dean of Men, boys that Kennedy was, I think his last name was Brandon. Matter of fact, I think they eventually, when he passed, named the school library after him, Brandon Library.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, in those positions, the folks that were in those positions, they were fair but firm. They did not play. I can honestly, because I was there at Eastside. And like I said, the folks would be saying the same thing about Kennedy, just like we had Miss Philpotts at Eastside. It's the same way they had Miss Van Rensselaer up at Kennedy. And folks, and it was a different time, a different day, because I'm still in education and I know the type of child that we get in terms of respect and disrespect and the things that they think they can do and be and so forth and so on. It is a different day. So that was Skip's mom. Now Skip comes along and he now gets into, because not only are you doing all this that I just described, but you were in education until you retired as well.
Yeah, I started at Eastside as a school social worker in 1973. Worked for 37 years, retired 2010. As a matter of fact, I'm still kind of semi-educated because I do a lot of substituting pretty exclusively at Norman S. Ware School in Paterson. So, yeah, I've been doing education for a lot of years.
I'm going to have to take you from Norman S. Ware and bring you over here with my young men. But that's another story. But in any event, but yes, I didn't realize it's been that long. So you've been retired since 10. So that's like 13 years. I didn't realize you've been retired that long.
Yeah. Hold on just 1 second. Mark.
Sure. I did not realize he was retired that long.
People come in. I'll be doing this until about 8 o'clock.
2023.
Just let them know I'm doing this interview, so everything I think is pretty set up. Okay.
There we go.
Appreciate that.
Not a problem. So yeah, well, I didn't realize it's been almost 13 years that you've been retired already. Wow, time really does sail. But in any event, let's get into now with Riff. because we had the whole thing with Eastside High School, and to this minute, when I say Eastside High School, people still look at me and say, "Oh, you went to Lean On Me High School?" Yes, but out of that came a singing group, because there's scenes in the movie where you have the boys in there that they actually sing, and you wound up now becoming like their manager. Let's talk about how did we get to that.
Well, if you were a student at Eastside, you know that Joe Clark was big on the school alma mater, school song. And I think every morning he would have somebody sing the school song. And sometimes it was one of those things you wanted to put your hands over your ears, because he would just pick anybody at random. And then one day he introduced a group called the Playboys. They were called the Playboys. And they got on the PA system and sang the school song, and the harmony was amazing. And you can relate, because you directed choir and you're a musician also.
Right.
And you hear that kind of harmony. And everybody was talking about them. When I heard them, I think I started writing some songs, just to write songs. But when I heard them, kind of made a beeline to the main office, made sure I found out who they were, introduced myself, and told them I was a songwriter, and I'd like to just try a couple of songs with them. So maybe a week or two after they made their quote-unquote debut with the PA system, I had them up in the third floor music room just going over some of my songs. Because, as a matter of fact, a couple of them admitted later on that they were very skeptical of his brother, who was trying to teach some songs, But that's how the relationship began, and one thing led to another. And because of the Lean On Me, there was a lot of interest with members of the staff that put together the movie. And they formed a production company called Fair Shot, which is a straight-up oxymoron, because they were anything but fair. The long story short, and between them and I eventually signed a managerial contract with Riff, and the rest is kind of history.
All right. Well, they are still, the songs are being played to this day. I don't know, is the group still together? Because I know one of the members, did one of the members pass away?
Yeah. Matter of fact, the first book I wrote was dedicated to Kenneth Kelly.
Kenneth, right.
One of the members passed away. One of the other members, Dwayne Jones, is now singing with Shy, because that my son sings with. So there's actually 3 original members left, and they're still performing. Unfortunately, and that's why I wrote the book, just to give everybody kind of the behind-the-scenes real sense of why they didn't accomplish some of the things that Boyz II Men and Jodeci did, because they were just as talented, if not more talented. But they're still performing, and the unfortunate thing is that their claim to fame still is East Side School song, alma mater. As a matter of fact, they refer to them now as the Dem Lean On Boys.
Right.
Boys, So, they've been riding that one song for over 30 years. So, they're still performing. They can still sing. Lord, they can sing.
Oh yeah, they could, because they could sing then, and they were kids at that time. So now they're grown. So I know that, and I agree with you. They were just Boyz II Men, Jodeci, any of those male groups like that. They were there, right along at the same caliber. And so I heard you mention Shy. Let's talk about where did Shy come from.
Shy is actually, my son explained to me once, an Egyptian term. Not sure what it means, but they began as 4 students at Howard University. They were all attending Howard University, which is also my alma mater. And it's a funny story, because I remember the song that blew up, If I Ever Fall in Love Again, the a cappella version, because they came out with that version first, and they did the remix. I remember they were all home, or my son was home for Thanksgiving recess, and they all came with them. And I remember sitting in my living room, and my son said, "Dad, I want you to hear something." They broke out in this harmony song, If I Ever Fall in Love. And I'll be honest with you, I thought it was nice, but I wasn't blown away by it. But they supposedly took, back in the day, they still had cassette tapes, took a cassette tape. They were having a citywide, one of the DJs from the radio station, having a citywide barbecue. And he asked them if they would play the song, and they played that song, and everybody's like, "Who was that? Where can I get a copy of that?" As a matter of fact, before they signed the contract, I think Gasoline Alley was the label. The song was out there, had blown up. The record label had to catch up with the song. So that's how they were born, just 4 students from Howard University, and lead singer wrote this song, and like I said, the rest is history with them.
I know, that's right. So I tell you what, since we are on the topic of your children and their talents and exploits in terms of, in acting or singing or what have you. Your daughter is traveling around the country on Broadway.
Yeah, she's been blessed, and as a Christian, you can relate. That's the only way I can describe it, because there are people out there, talented people, actors, actresses, trying to get their break. She went to Rutgers. She graduated from the Mason Gross School of Fine and Performing Arts in 2019. She's been dancing all her life, and maybe a year or so after that, we signed her up with an agent, and she was on Broadway within a couple of years as part of the ensemble of Hadestown. And she did that for a while as a swing. They call them swings, which is kind of a substitute when somebody else is not performing. She'll fill in. But she kept on auditioning, and she auditioned for Hamilton. But then Broadway went dark, as they say, because of the pandemic. So they called her right after the pandemic had subsided, and called her in for another audition. She made the traveling cast of Hamilton. She's been on tour now for over a year and a half. As we speak, she's currently in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But the blessings continue, because she was called. Anybody who's seen Hamilton, she plays the part of the Bullet. I mean, it's not a big part, but when Aaron Burr and Hamilton have this duel, she's kind of the Bullet in a dance kind of way. But right. They asked her to do that same part on Broadway, New York. So when this tour ends, which I think is June, she's going to immediately transitioned over to the cast in New York. So she'll be on Broadway in New York for a while.
Well, God bless. I am so happy to hear about that, because, again, I know Skip, his wife, I know her as well. I know the children. And, yes, he's absolutely right. It is absolutely a blessing to not only know him, but to see how the family has contributed to the music and the acting world, and just following their passions and their pursuits. And Skip is doing the same thing. That's why we're on the air this morning, because I guess it would say, as my grandmother used to say, I guess your son and daughter, your kids came by honest. As my grandmother would say, whenever, you pass down whatever you do to your kids, she used to say, well, they come by honest. So I guess your kids came by honest, because you pretty much are doing the same thing in terms of, like I said, a Renaissance man. You were doing the music, you had the choirs, the voiceovers in terms of the band, the hosting of the emceeing of the talent shows, and so forth and so on. And then you decided you wanted to write a book and become an author.
Well, the thing that a lot of people, if I can backtrack a little bit, because you mentioned graciously about my mom, and people remember her as the administrator and hard-nosed, but she loved her students. But what a lot of people don't realize, because unfortunately I don't have any videotapes, but she was something about music being passed down. My mother was the director of a choir here at First Name Zion Church called the a cappella choir. They did everything a cappella. And that's why I learned or got my love of the choir and the harmonies, because they would rehearse at the house. And I wish to God I had some kind of video of a concert. I don't even think they did a concert, but they could sing. Lord, Mark, they could sing. And so a lot of people don't know that. She was the director of the a cappella choir, and that's why I learned a lot of what I know or do now with my choirs. But the book, the writing, came about, I'm not going to say accidentally, but when I was on tour with Riff, we were on tour with Vanilla Ice, which was a major mistake, and I put that in the book. But it was something that we obviously couldn't get around, because the company we signed with, SBK Records, was the company of Vanilla Ice, and he was big back then. The Vanilla Ice, Wilson Phillips, found out later on they really had no idea how to promote a R&B group. But I kept a journal for like 4 years, pretty much every day. Anything we did, ups and downs, and it just kind of sat in my house for years. And because I kept getting questioned, about, what happened to Riff? How come Riff didn't do like Boys and Men? And I had the story right there in the journal, so I decided, well, let me transpose this into a book. So I contacted the publishing company, and I had to add some things because it had been sitting for a long time, so I did some interviews to get things updated, because I stayed in contact with the guys. So that's how the first book came about, just a 4-year journal that was very detailed, so it wasn't difficult to transpose it into a book. It had all the information already there. As a matter of fact, the first book was actually in a journal kind of format.
And the title of that book is, I saw it last night because it's actually on Kindle. I have your hard copy of it, but I know I saw it on Kindle last night as well.
Yes, six-part harmony, the untold story of Riff, and obviously I used a six-part harmony for the guys, 5 guys in a group, and myself, because we kind of went on that journey together. So I call it six-part harmony.
So that was your first book, correct?
Yes.
Now, as you were going through the process in terms of writing the book, getting it published, so forth and so on, what was that like for you the first time? Because I want you to think in terms of what, now that you've published another book, was that a help that you've already gone through the process, or was it because the subject matter is somewhat different? Was it totally different? What was it? Was there any difference between the first book and the second book?
Yeah, there were some differences, but there's some similarities too, because the second book is primarily was done through personal interviews, which I'll talk about later. But the first book, I was just kind of I was a novice, had no idea about publishing. As a matter of fact, I went to a gentleman from Paterson by the name of Sharif Bug, sponsored a few years a book signing for African-American authors in Paterson at one of the churches. I can't remember exactly which one. And I decided to go there, and I had my little notebook open, and I went to each author's station. I had to wind up buying a lot of books, but I picked their brain as to how they published, what it cost, and it was kind of an array of different responses. Like a lot of people self-published, some people linked up with a publishing company, some were more expensive than others. But I decided, because I could, I'm not rich by any means, but I had the ability to pay a publisher, so I decided I didn't want to do any of that stuff that the people who self-publish had told me they had to do. I wanted someone else to take care of that. I just wanted to write, submit my manuscript, and let them take it from there. So actually, I think everybody became a CNN viewer, when Trump was in office, because there was always something about Trump. So I was watching CNN. I watched the Yes Network because I'm a Yankees fan, and both stations were advertising this publishing company called Page Publishing. And I said, well, the Page Publishing is on CNN and the Yes Network. It must be legit. Called them, got a brochure, made contact, and submitted my manuscript, and they approved it, and I stayed with them for the second book also.
Wow, that's an interesting journey in terms of how you got to the publishing company. So the first book was about your experiences with Riff. Now the second book, and that's the one we're going to be talking about, and it was just released a few weeks ago. It is about the third largest city in New Jersey. It's the city that both Skip and I have grown up in or grew up in, and it is about Paterson. Now I know in our fraternity, Skip would always come in, and he named our good of the order section Up Close and Personal. So he would come in and he said, we called it UCAP, Up Close and Personal. So then when he came out, he said the new book he was writing was going to be Up Close and Paterson. I was like, all right.
Yeah.
So
that was kind of an easy segue, because like you said, I used to use that all fraternity meetings, and pretty much any meeting that I facilitated, because it was always, in my mind, a good way to end the meeting, because you know how some of those meetings can get kind of heated. And,
yeah.
Up close and personal was an opportunity to just go, like you were there, go around the table, have people speak about their families, what's my daughter doing, what's my son doing. But basically, 2018, when our current mayor, Andre Saya, ran for mayor, his platform was One Paterson. At that time, he was highlighting the wide range of diversity ethnicities that we have here in Paterson. It might be the most diverse city, not only in New Jersey, but maybe in the United States. So I thought about that. It stayed in my in my spirit, and I don't know if it just clicked one day, but I looked at that acronym Up Close and Personal, UCAP, and stuck to Paterson because I wanted to here again showcase the diversity of Paterson. So I decided to write the book Up Close and Paterson, and what I did was, as I mentioned, it was a series of interviews, but I wanted to do interviews of all different types of ethnicities: Muslims, Hispanics, blacks, whites, So that's what I did. Obviously, having been raised and worked and everything else in Paterson for years, I had a wide base. I knew a lot of people. Matter of fact, I think I tapped into Andre Sayer for, he has a big Muslim constituency, so he gave me some names. And I went from there. I just picked people. The thing about it, though, is in the book, there's a page called Spontaneous Selection, because one of my concerns was, like, I'm going to write this book about Paterson. And you know, Marcus, you've been here most of your life, not all your life. There are many people I could have put in the book, and I was concerned that people would pick up the book and say, Skip, I can't believe you wrote a book about Paterson, and Marc Medley's not in there.
You see, I was going to tease you about that, because that's exactly what I was going to say. But I saw the spontaneous page. I did.
Yeah. So what I decided to do was just put a page in there and indicate, and I was very sincere about it, because one of my favorite scriptures, is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And then in the 6, says, acknowledge him in all your ways and he'll direct your path. So that's what I decided to do. I prayed about it, and I said, just take me to who you want in my book. And that's exactly what he did. As a matter of fact, I put on the page, if you're a Christian, then you understand what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
If you're not a Christian, I don't have to explain it. But that's what he did, because some of the people, it was very spontaneous. I could pick out a couple. Monique Scott, who's upcoming and an amazing comedian, went to a retirement dinner with a friend of mine and wife, and she was the entertainment for the evening, but she segued from her skit into how her story came about, and almost to the point of tears, and I said, she's got to be in the book. Went immediately to her table and asked her, and the blessing of this book is that everybody I asked, with I think one exception, agreed to be in the book. So I got everything from Muslims to African Americans and Hispanics and whites and ex-drug addicts up to Congressman Pasquales and everything in between. So I think it's a nice, diverse. But I still think sometimes after the books actually come out, I see people, I'm like, oh my God, man, where were you like 2 years ago when I thought, people I really think I would have wanted in the book,
So that means you have to do a volume 2. So you just keep it going.
I'll do a volume 2.
Got to do a volume. But it is, for those of you in the listening audience, I hope you've been with me since 6, certainly since 7, because that's when my guest came on with me. We're talking with Dale Skip Van Rensselaer, and I billed it and I promoted it as Skip being a Renaissance man. Now, they say game, no game. So for me, I consider myself a Renaissance man as well. So Renaissance man, no Renaissance man. And what I mean by that is the ability or the desire to do more than just one thing, and not only do them, but do them well. Skip has his hands in a lot of different things and done them all well. That's why I call him a Renaissance man. And right now we're talking about his latest endeavor, which is his book, Up Close and Paterson. And he's talking about the city of Paterson, which is the third largest city in the state of New Jersey. What folks really, I don't think, understand is New Jersey is predominantly rural. It is the 3 or 4 major cities that you have in there, but the rest of the state, because Skip, as a kid, I never understood why we were called the Garden State, because in Paterson you don't see any gardens. So I didn't never understand why we were called the Garden State until when I got in the Air Force and I was down in McGuire Air Force Base, and as I would travel back and forth down there, I was really realizing just how rural New Jersey was. I was like, most of the state really looks just like the South. And so I understood now why we were called the Garden State, because outside of the major cities, it really is rural, and folks do have gardens and farms and all that kind of good stuff. But this is the thing. Paterson and the major cities, all 3 of them, Jersey City, Newark, Paterson, if you can throw Camden in there, whatever, most of your major cities gets a bad rap. And the good thing about your book and books like yours, because it's kind of like going back to the Bible when they say, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? People ask the same question about Paterson. Can anything good come out of Paterson? And books like yours show that, yes, a lot of good comes out of Paterson.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I can't really think what the actual age range of the people I interviewed, but there were no youth per se who are living in Paterson now. But most of the people, a lot of them my age, a lot of them your age, when they reflect back on the days of Paterson, it was a different it was a different city. Because one of the things, I didn't want to put together a group of questions to ask each interviewee, just so they could expound on or just lead in so they could just go from there. And one of the questions was compare Paterson now to when you grew up. And the contrast is amazing because obviously people have a lot of issues with the crime and the schools and the cleanliness and the things that really existed but were not as obviously paramount as they are today. So because I've done a couple of schools presenting the book, and I tell the young people, you may not recognize some of the names in this book, but you need to read their stories, number one, because they can give you kind of a panoramic view of what Paterson's like growing up. And you'll see it was a different city. Plus, a lot of these people who are educators now or council people or things of that nature didn't have an easy road to where they are now. They had to overcome some obstacles and maneuver through some bumps in the road. And I think for young people, it's something that they need to read. It's nothing more than just an encouragement because obviously young people will have those kind of things in their lives, and they need to know they can navigate around it and get over it and eventually succeed like a lot of people in the book did.
Well, to your point about Paterson being a different Paterson, that's for a lot of reasons. You talk about the diversity of the city, but at one point, Paterson was predominantly Caucasian. And that was prior to, the, as they call, quote unquote, white flight and all the different other groups started coming in. Because I remember my mom and my dad always talking about certain streets and how pristine they were, certain areas and how wonderful and great. They were here in the 50s when Paterson was that Paterson that you're talking about. But still, because of anytime we hear anything or see anything on the news, it's usually something negative. That's why folks have this perception that the entire city is like negative, when that's not the truth, because there's only a couple of pockets within the city that all of that violence and negativity takes place. But the rest of the city is like any other community. But that's not what's seen on the news. And that's why a book like yours is so important. Because it does show, there are some worthy, for lack of a better term, worthy people who came from Paterson and still live in Paterson. And so a book like yours is very important for folks to understand. Plus, we have the history there. We have the whole thing with Hinchliffe Stadium, with the falls, with the Sam Colt, with the submarine, the locomotive. I mean, there's a whole lot of history. The fact that Paterson was called the Silk City. At one point, Paterson produced just as much, if not more, silk than over in China. So there's a lot of history to Paterson, but people get so overtaken by the negativity that it doesn't come out. Most of the time, whenever I'm talking to some of my Caucasian friends, they will say their grandparents grew up in Paterson. There's a couple of things that they will point out. They will point out the farmers market over there on Railway Avenue and E&V restaurant up there on Chamberlain. And now those two things, if I mention Paterson to my Caucasian friends, they will point that out. E&V restaurant and the farmers market. And they'll start telling me how their grandparents grew up in Paterson or their parents grew up in Paterson as well. So Paterson has a lot of good to it, but we need folks to tell the story, and that's what you are doing.
Exactly. Because it's funny you mentioned it, because as I'm doing interviews, and I was born and raised in Paterson, 73 years old, I learned things about Paterson I never knew. If I had to pick the predominant ethnicity in Paterson back in the day, it would be Italian. Paterson was an Italian city.
Right.
Actually, a couple of people who are African American, when they were talking about growing up in the CCPs, the Christopher Columbus projects, told me that was predominantly Italian. I can't even picture CCPs being Italian, because, there was always this discussion going around that, projects were built just so we could keep all the black folks in one area of the town.
Right.
So I always pictured CCP, Riverview Towers, all being just black from the get-go. But one of the people in the book, Lorraine Stanzel, told me about how when she moved, one of the first black families to move into the CCPs, and one of her best friends was a little Italian girl. I'm like, are you serious? But that's how I'm glad that Jimmy Richardson, because if you think about it, when you read the book, the interviews are very personal, which is what I wanted them to be. People talk about Patterson, obviously from their vantage point growing up, but I wanted a more historical picture of Paterson at the end, and that's where Jimmy Richardson came in, and he gave a lot of background on the significance of Paterson, like you said, the Colt 45, Silk City, the inventor of the first submarine, John Holland, from Huntoon-Paterson. We actually have a school named after him. So, there's a lot of history in Paterson, but like you said, when you read the book, you'll see, or you'll read how Paterson was growing up in different sections. The Riverside section, which was like really just basically Italian.
Correct.
As opposed to other sections of the town. And I even tell kids, I had a presentation in one of the schools, and I think a lot of young people don't realize they might be more familiar with Woodland Park. It used to be West Paterson.
Correct.
Did you know that Elmwood Park used to be East Paterson? Correct. And I wouldn't be surprised one day if South Paterson becomes another name, because when you change the name, you have to keep the same initials. So
correct.
East Paterson will keep Elmwood Park. And the common thinking is that people just want to disassociate themselves with Paterson. So let's get that Paterson out of our name. Now we're Elmwood Park.
Correct.
We're Woodland Park. So.
No, you're absolutely right. That's exactly over time. That's exactly. I mean, many people, some do, but many people don't realize exactly what you said. Well, Woodland Park they might, because that one's kind of recent. But Elmwood Park, a lot of people had no idea that was East Paterson.
East Paterson.
Right. Elmwood Park was East Paterson. Woodland Park was West Paterson. And like you said, I don't know if there's a move on for South Paterson to break away or not, but I don't know. They might name themselves something different too. I don't know. But you're right. That's why I was saying earlier in terms of Paterson getting a bad rap. And
I was thinking, I made a joke, as a matter of fact, since all the other sections became Park, Elmwood Park, Woodland Park. I wonder if South Paterson would be called South Park. I don't think they want to do that.
South Park.
Not based on that cartoon I see.
I know that's right, but they were seceding. You got the different parts of Paterson seceding and taking away the Paterson name. But Paterson is not all bad. It really is not. It's just that it's promoted because that's all you see. Matter of fact, the city's in turmoil right now because of a police shooting that happened, or a few police shootings that happened, a couple of weeks ago. So, but that's all you hear on the news. Now, these people, how many folks did you interview in the book? How many folks are in there?
Started out, my goal was 20. I wound up interviewing 35.
So there are 35 individuals in that book from all walks of life, from all fields. You have even recovering or recovered folks who were addicted. You have even folks like that. And so it spans the gamut. It's not just the muckety mucks. It's not just the popular names within the city. It is folks that you may or may not have heard of if you didn't pick up a book like Skip has written. And that's why, to be honest with you, while I would love to be in the second volume, and I'm teasing, I don't have a problem with not being. It's because I'm, for the most part, pretty well known. Skip had the opportunity to highlight some people who may or may not be as well known.
Yeah, but you know what? It's funny you say that because of what you've accomplished. And I'm not saying this because of what you just said. There are people like yourself who, if I do a volume 2, who very, very well may be in the book, only because I learned, or my intent with the first book was like what you just exactly said, to highlight people who everyone may not know, not your usual household names. But what I found out is people like Al Moody and Lorraine Stanzel and Scott Cobblebatch, people whose names are out there, once you read their stories, you say to yourself, really? Dr. Joe Fulmer, I'm interviewing him. And I did pretty much the same process. I had a little tape recorder. And Dr. Fulmer mentioned about him being part of the Black Panther Party. And he's our frat brother. I turned the tape off, Mark. I said, Doc, what? Black Panther? And I needed him to give me off record a little lead into that.
Right.
So people who you thought you knew, you're going to find out a lot of different things about them in the book.
Well, you know what? Now you drop, as my daughter can say, you dropped some tea on me there, because I didn't know Joe was in the Black Panthers either.
Listen, I didn't either, man.
But you know what? This is another reason why, and I just had this experience a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you know Larry Ham or not. I did not know Larry until I met him a couple of weeks ago at a function, at a program. Matter of fact, he's going to be on the show, I believe, in April. Larry Ham is the youngest person that has ever been appointed to a school board, and he was appointed by the mayor at that time, Ken Gibson, in Newark. When Mayor Gibson was mayor of Newark, he appointed Larry Ham to the school board, Newark School Board, and Larry was only like 17, 18 years old, if that. So, but he's always been an activist, and I met him a couple of weeks ago. And another one was Reverend Dr. Forrest Pritchard. He works down at Seton Hall.
Jane and Tony, the Smiths have it.
So,
This was a bring it.
uh-oh. Now, for those of you who are wondering what's going on, Skip is actually doing community service this morning, so he's at that location. That's what's going on in the background. That's why he didn't come live into the studio. Because you said you were doing a food serving, correct, Skip?
Say it again?
I said you said you were doing, because I was telling the audience the noise you're hearing in the background is because you're actually doing some community service this morning. You said it was some food serving?
I apologize. But yeah, the first thing is down in church. We do a feeding for homeless people every third Saturday, and that's why I opted to do the phone thing, because
right.
I kind of facilitate that to be here early, set things up. And people, my wife, matter of fact, she knows I'm on interview. She peeked around the corner, to ask me a question. So I apologize for that. But we start feeding here about 8:30, and they're in the kitchen now preparing. And obviously, we're out for about 2 years because of the pandemic.
Right.
We started back in January. So every third Saturday, we do a feeding here at First Church.
So that's where he is. That's what you're hearing in the backdrop. So if you're wondering what is all that noise back there, he's on location of their church doing their monthly feeding of the homeless and the hungry, so forth and so on. But what I was saying, Skip, was I met two gentlemen, Larry Ham and Reverend Dr. Forrest Pritchard, a couple of weeks ago, who are activists and so on, who have been in Black Panthers and all these different movements as well. But all of us now are getting into these 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s age range. So,
right.
Again, why it's so important to have books like yours is to tell the story when we're gone.
Yeah.
And more of us are getting older and leaving, and the kids are not having, because one of the things I told the audience, because I was the MC for that particular program, that Larry Ham was the keynote speaker, as well as Reverend Pritchard. I said, our kids need to hear from us. They need to hear. They need to sit with their elders and hear what it was like 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. They need to understand and appreciate the historic value of those of us who are here and went through whatever we went through.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when it was first mentioned to me, Volume 2, I just kind of, that's not going to happen. I was fortunate, and that's not a word I like to use for the pandemic, because so many people lost their lives, but things are shut down. So the fortunate part of doing the bulk of this book during the pandemic was that the accessibility to a lot of people was much greater. The schedules had been carved down because of the pandemic. Some people weren't working, et cetera. But I said, if I do Volume 2, then everybody's kind of almost back to normal. It might be difficult. That was the biggest part of the biggest obstacle with the first book, wanting to respect everybody's time and schedule. And I would have interviews that were done, and then people would cancel at the last minute. And then once I got the first interview, there was a process that was done. I would do a draft, send a draft to the person, let them decide if they want this in there, because some people are very candid. And I was very careful, maybe more than once, but more than twice, asked them, do you really want this in the story? Because it's going to go out in the book universe. And once they told me they were okay with it, I put it in. But so Volume 2, that's why I was a little reluctant. But now that I think about it, and even hearing what you're saying, and seeing people I really would like to be, really would have loved to have in the first book, there may be a Volume 2, but along with that, and I don't know how I would shape it, but I'd really like to have at least 2 or 3 young people in the book, just to chronicle what they've done in their life. Maybe high school seniors or maybe first-year college students. And like you said, years later, they can reflect back on what they were doing and where they are now. So I'm almost sure I'm going to get at least 2 or 3 young people in the book if I do a volume 2.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that will go a long way in terms of student voice and everything. But again, I'm a big, and my mother was always a big proponent of it. She'd say this years ago, and I'd kind of poo-poo it and kind of look at it and say, yeah, right, Mom, yeah, I understand. But she would always say, the young folks need to sit down and talk to the elders, talk to those who were back in the 50s, the 40s, the 60s, the 70s. So they need to sit down and understand what things were like, and they haven't always been the way they are now. The other day, my phys ed teacher, who's 25, came running into me, and he just could not believe that when he mentioned AOL.com, that the boys looked at him and had no clue what he was talking about. He says, Mr. Medley, they didn't know AOL. And I said, AOL what? I said, you talking about AOL.com? He says, yeah. I said, well, yeah, they wouldn't. They weren't born yet. And so it's so many things that have gone on technological-wise, race relation-wise, historical-wise, that if they don't tap into us, they will never know what brought them to where we are. Like, say, for example, that's why I started to show off talking about your family history in terms of the Underground Railroad. And so folks need to understand the roles and the parts that we played and where we are in 2023. And to me, a book like yours does that.
Yeah, hopefully. Hopefully. I mean, like I said, when I set out, it was about the diversity, but it became a labor of love as I started doing interviews. My thought process was exactly what you're saying now. It was like people just need to know your story. And another sidebar or irony of doing these interviews is that there were at least 3 or 4 people once they started. It's funny when you know what your life has been like, but when you start expounding on it or you're interviewed and you start talking about your life, I had at least 3 or 4 people say that they're probably going to write a book themselves about their lives, which was encouraging to me, and it was good to hear. So, this is, I don't want to label it a must-read because that's kind of a cliche.
Oh, I would. I hear what you're saying.
It's important. It's an important book. Turned into an important book. It wasn't my mindset when I set out, but after hearing the stories and writing what these people had to say, and the thing you have to remember is that when you read these stories, I think maybe I get tops 4 or 5 pages. Some people are a lot less. There's so much more to these people. Maybe it'll pique people's interest to find out. Young people may seek out a Lorraine Stanzel or a Dr. Fulmore or Al Moody. Like, I read your story in this book, but I got some questions for you, and that would be the ultimate for me. And I told the people, don't be surprised if some young people, whoever, even some of your peers, read this story. And I used to be facetious about it, saying, listen, don't come to Skip. Skip, you said that Marc Medley, blah, 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 blah. You know he didn't do that. But listen, I got stuff on tape. You go see Marc Medley. Don't come to me.
Don't come to because they said, I know that's right. But I tell you, and I sent you a picture of it. And a matter of fact, I took another shot of it yesterday because I'm going to put it on LinkedIn because I put the 4 authors that's in my display case in the entrance of my school. I rearranged the books, and there's your book, there's Vaughn McCoy, there's Courtney. I'm trying to think. I had Courtney on the show a couple of weeks ago. I had Courtney, and then there is Letitia Nicole. Her book. The 4 of you, one, have been on the show. Secondly, you're local or either, if you're not necessarily in New Jersey, you're in the New York, Connecticut area. But so is your book on one side, Vaughn's book is on the other. Both of you are from Paterson. And then I have Courtney and I have Letitia's books in there. But I'm going to put that on LinkedIn. I'm going to tag all 4 of you on there. And just to let folks know, because the other day, exactly what you just said did happen. I just hired a 5th grade teacher. And when he was there for the interview, he knew of you. He knows who you are. So when he saw the book there, and then he saw Vaughn's book, and he says, I know him too. I know both of them. And he turned around, Skip, and said exactly what you just said. He said, you know what? I think I might want to write a book.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, brother? Go ahead for it. Go for it. If you feel that's what you want to do, go for it. But he looked, and the other thing that came to me, I walked out of the area because the display case is right before you enter the conference area, main office areas, right in the main hallway. But when I walked out and I looked at your book sitting there, what came to my mind was, I said, Skip is leaving a legacy. Because this is the thing about books. When we're gone, that book is still going to be here.
Exactly. And I never thought about that. Right. I think you mentioned it. I never thought about that, but it's true.
Yeah, I said Skip is leaving a legacy because that book is going to be in somebody's basement, somebody's attic, somebody's library, somebody's something, or a display case like it is in mine at the school. That book is going to be somewhere even after you're gone and I'm gone. That's the one thing about books. They do give you an opportunity to leave a legacy. And then because your book is about what it's about, all the people who are in the book are going to have a legacy as well. Because people will always, matter of fact, because I know the chapter, our fraternal chapter here in the city, we have a section down in the museum. Hopefully you can get your book down there as a part of Alpha.
Well, as a matter of fact, one of my book launchings or book signing was at the museum on February 28th, and Dustin Limited chapter launched their historic display that same night. Obviously, we hope to expand, and the library did purchase 2 books. I'm hoping they'll have them on display there. But yeah, it was a beautiful evening, and all that history with our chapter and the fraternity and the people in the book, and a lot of people who were in the book came that evening. I introduced them. Uncle Floyd, who I thought Uncle Floyd was dead. I don't mean to say it like that.
No, I know exactly what you're saying.
I mentioned earlier, everybody pretty much agreed to be in the book except one, and that one person was my neighbor across the street who, I don't know if he's Italian, but I wanted him in the book. And he said, nah, Skip, I really want to. But he went to this bagel shop every morning. He said, what about Uncle Floyd? Because that's his hangout, Uncle Floyd, in Total Bagel Shop. I said, Uncle Floyd, I remember Uncle Floyd. I seen him perform a couple times. And I said the same thing to him. I thought he was passed. But no, he's alive. So I went to Uncle Floyd, and he agreed to be in the book. And matter of fact, the day of the book signing at the museum, he did like a 15-minute stand-up set. He was funny. It was really so. People need to know about Uncle Floyd, man. And besides him being a comedian and entertainer, he's kind of a semi-historian with regard to Patterson. Right. He gave me stuff I knew nothing about as far as Patterson, statistics and everything. So it was a blessing. It really was.
Well, I know that's right. Well, believe it or not, the hour has gone by. Everywhere I was like, how long are we going to talk? I said about an hour, and folks be like, what are we going to talk about for an hour? But the hour flies. And
yeah, it does.
We're down to the last couple of things, though, before I even get to the point and where I let you promote and do whatever you'd like to do for a couple of minutes. I saw that you were on Django. Skip is a musician as well. I'm on Django also. I have 2 CDs on Django, and I was going through there, and I saw you on Django, the song that you wrote about your mom.
Yeah, she passed in 95, and I think I wrote the song shortly after that. And I would pretty much, I never really got through it. I would sing it every Mother's Day, or try to sing it every Mother's Day in church.
Right.
But, the emotions would kick in, and I'd wind up crying. And, so I decided, let me go to the studio and get it recorded. That's what I did. I got some members of Riff through the background. Got some, at the time I was substituting pretty much regularly at Rosa Parks High School until I got a new vocal teacher. Got some Rosa Parks students, and Mother's Love, wrote a song about my mother.
Right.
And,
well, what I'm going to do in the 8 o'clock hour when I go back to the music format, I'm actually going to play a few of the riff tunes. I will probably play some of the shy tunes, and I will play that one as well. I'll be doing that in the 8 o'clock hour. But in terms of what I do at the end of the interview is I give you the opportunity to promote in terms of websites, contact information, anything. Only thing you can't say is dollar amount or cost. Anything short of that, you can shout out anybody you want. You can say whatever you'd like. The only thing, like I said, you can't say is pricing and all that. You can do that when folks get in touch with you. So I'm going to shut the mic off, and this is your opportunity to promote. Okay. Well, basically, let me first start by saying I appreciate my frat brother Marc giving me this opportunity again. The book is currently on Amazon. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can contact me personally. Marc has my number, and he has my permission to put my phone number out there, 201-306-3215. Call me personally, and I can order the book for you and sign it for you. But there's even an iBook that you can purchase. So those outlets, you can get the book. I'm trying to get it in store at Barnes & Noble, but I'm still working on that. But right now it is on there.
outlet, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and iTunes. So once again, I appreciate Marc Medley giving me the opportunity to be on the show. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you rising early. As a matter of fact, being on site there at the feeding, that you took the time to still do the interview, even though you were performing God's work, even though you were performing a community service and making life better for others. So we still took the time. So audience, again, if you heard some background noise, it's because Skip was on location. He's there at his church coordinating their monthly feeding drive for the homeless and the hungry. So I thank you that you still carried out the interview, even though you had that commitment. I wish you nothing but the best in all of your endeavors, as well as your children and everything that they're doing in the artistic world. I wish you all the best with that. And again, like I said, when I walked out the office the other day and I looked at it, I said, Skip is leaving a legacy. That's exactly what he's doing. I said, good. He is leaving a legacy. And so proud of you, my brother. You're a true alpha man. True alpha man. Have a wonderfully blessed day. And, I'll see you at the next fraternity meeting.
God is good.
Yes, he is. All right.
Take care, bro.
All right. Take care.